In northern Burkina Faso, terrorists had captured yet another village. The local population waited hopefully for military assistance. When armored vehicles entered the village, the villagers were stunned by the soldiers who emerged before them, a unit of fully equipped and extremely professional female soldiers. The Lionesses of the Sahel, Africa's first all-women special forces unit, had arrived on the field. The village of Cumbri had been under terrorist control for 3 weeks. Located in Burkina Faso's northern province, it was one of dozens of communities that had fallen to insurgent groups in the past 5 years. The pattern was always the same. Armed men would arrive at dawn, execute local leaders who resisted established harsh control, and use the village as a base for further operations. When the first armored personnel carriers appeared on the horizon, the villagers assumed it was an outer military patrol that would briefly stop, perhaps exchange fire with hidden insurgents, and then retreat to their base, leaving the civilians to face brutal retaliation afterward. This had been the cycle for years, but something was different this time. The vehicles moved with deliberate precision, establishing a secure perimeter around the village with practiced efficiency, and when the rear hatches opened, the villagers stared in disbelief. The soldiers who emerged were women, not support staff or medical personnel, but full combat operators in desert camouflage, carrying advanced weapons, moving with the disciplined confidence of elite fighters. Each wore the insignia, the newly formed unit that few outside military circles had heard of. The Lionesses of the Sahel. Their commander, Captain Aisha Wedrao, stood 5'6" with her boots on, but carried herself with an authority that made her seem much taller. At 32, she had already served 10 years in Burkina Faso's regular army before being selected to lead this experimental unit. She surveyed the village with experienced eyes, noting the signs of insurgent occupation, propaganda, graffiti on walls, evidence of makeshift command posts, and the fearful, uncertain faces of villagers. "Secure the perimeter," she ordered calmly. "Bravo Team Conduct House, to house Charlie Team, establish the medical station. Remember, we're not just here to clear, we're here to hold." The women moved with practiced coordination, each knowing her role precisely. Unlike previous military operations in the region that focused on brief engagements before withdrawal, this unit had a different mission: establish a permanent presence, build trust with the local population, and create conditions for stability. The concept behind the Lionesses had emerged 6 months earlier, in a tense meeting at Burkina Faso's presidential palace. President Ibrahim Traoré had summoned his military leadership after yet another failed operation against insurgent groups left a dozen soldiers dead, and a village still under enemy control. "Our current approach isn't working," Traoré had said, studying the grim reports. "Before him we clear an area, leave, and the terrorists return. The next day, the villagers don't trust us because we don't stay. We need a new strategy." General Kabor, the aging head of the armed forces, had responded with the traditional solution: "We need more equipment, more air support. The French have offered additional advisory teams." "No," Traoré interrupted firmly. "Warfare and advisors aren't the answer. We've had French, American, and European training missions for years, and the situation has only worsened. We need Burkinabe solutions for Burkinab problems." The room had fallen silent, the tension palpable since taking power. Traoré had consistently pushed against dependency on Western militaries, that it often came with hidden agendas and failed to address local realities. It was Colonel Mayam Sankaroni, of the few women in the high command, who broke the silence with an unexpected proposal. "Mr. President, I've been reviewing our intelligence on insurgent tactics. They've adapted specifically to our male-dominated force structure. They know our patterns, our limitations." She paused, gathering courage for her next words. "But they have a vulnerability we haven't exploited: their religious them deeply uncomfortable engaging with women in combat. They believe being killed by a woman prevents their path." These. The room filled with dismissive murmurs, but Traoré leaned forward, intrigued. "Continue, Colonel. I propose we create a specialized, all-female unit trained specifically for the unique challenges of our northern regions. Women who understand the language, the culture, who can gather intelligence no male soldier could access, who can establish relationships with female villagers." "Oh, I've been systematically intimidated into silence," General Kabor scoffed. "With respect, Colonel, this isn't some gender equality experiment. We're fighting a war against hardened extremists." "Exactly," Sankara countered, undeterred, "and we're fighting it exactly as they expect us to. What if we did something they could never anticipate, something their ideology hasn't prepared them for?" Traoré studied the maps on the wall, considering the proposal. It was radical, unconventional, and precisely the kind of innovative thinking he had been demanding from his military leadership. "How would this unit operate?" Neferim, "Our current forces," he asked. Colonel Sankara was prepared for this question. "They would be trained not just in combat operations, but in community stabilization. They would deploy to a village and stay establishing security while simultaneously building relationships particularly with the women and children who see everything but are never consulted by male soldiers. They would serve as both warriors and bridges between the military and civilian populations. The debate had continued for hours, with traditional military leaders raising objections about women's physical capabilities, cultural sensitivities, and logistical. But TRAORE had made his decision. By the meeting's end, we will establish this unit, he announced. Colonel Sankara, you will oversee its formation. Select 50 women from our existing forces, plus another 50 civilian recruits, with relevant skills, languages, medical training, community development. You have 3 months to create an operational unit. The meeting adjourned. General Kaber approached TRAORE privately. Mr. President, with respect, the Western advisors will strongly oppose this. They have established protocols, doctrine, then we won't inform them until the unit is. TRAORE replied simply, this is a sovereign BURKINA initiative. We will seek forgiveness rather than permission. The selection process began immediately and proved more challenging than anticipated, not for lack of candidates but because of an overwhelming response when the call went out for women to join this specialized unit. Over to 0 applied within the first week. They came from every region of Burkina Faso. Existing military personnel gained new challenges. Police officers, nurses, teachers, and many who had personally suffered from extremist violence. The training compound outside Ouagadougou became a laboratory for innovation. Traditional special force training was adapted to emphasize the unit's unique mission. Beyond combat skills, the women studied local dialects, cultural sensitivities, basic medical care, and community development strategies. They trained extensively in specific urban and rural environments. They would operate in using mock villages to practice clearing operations that minimized civilian casualties. Captain Aisha Arago Emergitas, the natural choice to lead the unit's first operational company raised in a border village that had later fallen to extremists. She spoke 4 local languages and had served with distinction in the regular army. More importantly, she grasped the dual nature of their mission. They needed to be both fearsome fighters and community builders or male counterparts. Focus on the enemy, she told her troops during training. We must focus equally on the civilians. Victory isn't just removing insurgents from a village. For a day, it's making that village resistant to their return. 3 months into training, word of the experimental unit reached Western military advisors in the capital. Their action was predictably negative. A French colonel assigned to the EU training mission demanded a meeting with TRAORE. Mr. President, this initiative undermines years of established doctrine. These women cannot possibly be ready for combat operations against hardened insurgents with only 6 months off training. TRAORE had listened politely before responding, Colonel, your country has been providing military assistance in the Sahel for over a decade. In that time, the insurgency has grown stronger, not weaker. Perhaps it's time to try approaches your doctrine hasn't considered. Despite foreign skepticism, training continued. The women developed innovative tactics that played to their strengths rather than trying to mirror male units. They emphasized intelligence gathering, precision operations, and community engagement. They trained extensively, in pairs and small teams, developing an almost intuitive coordination. 6 months after that initial meeting, the unit was deemed combat ready. Their first deployment would be to the Somme province, one of the most contested regions. In that country, the mission reclaim and hold the village of Cumbri, establishing a model for a new approach to counterinsurgency. Now, as Captain Yaro led her troops through the village, they faced their first real test. The insurgents had fled before their arrival. An intelligence leak had unfortunately warned them of the legit operation, but the challenge of securing the village remained. Sergeant Fatima Dio, leading Bravo team through house-to-house searches, encountered the first major challenge in a small compound at the village edge. The women were barred from entering by an elderly man. No women with weapons will enter my home, he declared firmly. It is against your traditions. Rather than force entry, as male soldiers might have done, Sergeant Dio approached friendly